everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to Refresh. A time to connect, as we know, which is today the word of the day. Be inspired, learn something, and ultimately feel a bit better for this time we spend together. And that's what Generation W is all about. And speaking about Generation W, which we do a lot these days because we are neck deep, or should I say eye deep, in planning for our April 16th. One more year virtual event, which, listen, we are so excited. I want everyone to register because we want to celebrate with you. I mean, you are the celebration. And you know, this is a day that our good friend Christina Norman has been quoted as saying that if you can take one day out of your year and feel super inspired and walk taller, it's a day worth taking. And that is Generation W. And the speaker lineup this year is a day up and down, top to bottom, across the whole thing. Amazing, amazing speakers, amazing topics. And all right, I'll give you a little example. Carla Harris, for those of you who know Powerhouse Carla Harris, we'll talk about intentional leadership. John Gordon, the nationally known guy on positivity, has a great talk on grit and success. Lisa McLaughlin and Robin McIntosh will talk about mental wellness, mental health, and addiction. We'll talk about intentionality in our own lives. Lisa Shallot will lead an amazing conversation with Andrea Smith from Bank of America. And oh gosh, we all remember the artist and activist Michelle Browder from Montgomery, Alabama, and Jeannie Diffenderfer, a previous guest of Refresh. The corporate executive, you know, who's now finding solace in spirituality. They will inspire our thinking. I promise you, I've spent some time with all of them. It's just terrific. So check genwnow.com for more information. And let's just talk about today. I don't know about you, but when I get up in the morning, I do read. And I'm sure everybody picks up something. And I usually pick up a newspaper or two on my device. And I read the headlines, and I got to tell you, I was really dismayed. The shootings in Atlanta targeting Asian Americans. The rise in hate crimes has got to be not only disarming, but alarming, right? Alarming in so many ways. Attacks against Asians and Asian Americans have risen astronomically since the beginning of the pandemic. And this morning, as I then read the headlines, I then went to my email, and there was one from this group that I belong to, I adore, which everyone knows. It's called Women in America. Lisa Tepper's a member, and Anna, board member for that. And they sent us this really beautiful note that says, we at Women in America are shocked and saddened by the growing violence and reject the racism, xenophobia, and intolerance towards our AAPI colleagues, their families, and loved ones. And I just wanted to put that out there as well, because I think it is in solidarity. It is through connection, Susan McPherson, that we are able to not only support each other, but create the empathy we need to create a stronger community, not only next door, but around the world. So Sherry or Mariah will put in our chat, Women in America provided some support material. I actually already went through one of the articles. I'm going to share it with you because I think it's really helpful. And I want to thank our leadership at Women in America for not only sending this important message this morning, which really I think all of us can feel, but also providing support materials. And this, of course, does tie directly into our conversation today, which speaks to a nation that is disconnected in ways that are really important. There's no doubt that connection breeds understanding. It deepens relationship, right? It affords us more kindness. I've got to think that if we're more greatly connected, these things wouldn't happen. And so it's always timely to have a person like Susan McPherson, who, by the way, as I prepared for our conversation today, found out she is connected to everybody. She's everyone's friend, and that's a delightful discovery. But what you should know about Susan is she's a serial connector, a seasoned communicator, and founder of, CEO of McPherson Strategies, a communications consultancy focused on the intersection of brands and social impact. And we'll talk about that because that is a core root in the work that she's done today. She has written a book. It will be out in, I guess, what, Susan, a few weeks?
March 23rd.
March 23rd, we are counting the days. It's a book called The Lost Art of Connecting, the Gather, Ask, Do method for building meaningful business relationships to foster value-based connections by going back to basics. And I think this is a great conversation every day, but especially now, Susan, when we're living in a world with no matter how many devices that are fooling us, right? We think we're connected, right? But are we?
Yeah. It's a really interesting question. And my original thesis for the book, which was
Yes.
long before we had even an inkling that this horror storm was coming, was the fact that we had become over reliant on our technology, over reliant on our devices, and probably even more importantly, over reliant on the clicks and likes and followers that we use to measure our own success when it comes to connectivity. So lo and behold, I started writing the book in January, February 2020. Well, we all know what happened a year ago in March. And all of a sudden, this became the only means. Those clicks and likes were the only way we could like send signals to one another and connect. So I had to almost rethink the entire theory of the book. And through about 30 interviews that were conducted during the writing of the book, we really digged deep to determine what it is that actually is a meaningful connection. How do we connect through the pandemic, but also how have we connected through our lifetimes? And I have to tell you, and I will share with the audience, 2 weeks ago, I burst into tears because it felt absolutely, quite frankly, ridiculous to be launching a book, and bittersweet, to be launching a book about connection during the most isolating and lonely time in all of our lives. And, you know, confess to one item here, I've been living alone, no children, no parents, no spouse or partner since last March. So it felt very bittersweet to be, again, publishing a book about this very subject. However, my wise sister said to me, there's never been a more important time to actually put out into the world the deep, meaningful importance of building those types of connections that can stand a global pandemic, that will stand the test of time. Those people, and I'm sure there's many people in this community that have connection with one another, that you keep coming back, you keep showing up. And there's ebbs and flows. There's times when perhaps you can't be as connected because of something going on in your life, but then you come back. So that is a bit about the thesis and what the book is all about.
No, well, listen, we are totally simpatico with you because our work is also about connection. And the idea is if you step in that space and create that space for people to come together and understand it better, you are doing what we call a mitzvah. It's a great service.
I'm Jewish. I know a mitzvah.
Susan McPherson. Okay, there we go. Well, for those of our friends who are not, a mitzvah is a good deed, right? So this is a really good thing. Now you mentioned what is a deep and authentic connection? How did you differentiate? What did you learn in all the interviews and all your work throughout your career about what is authentic?
Well, let's start with what isn't. Okay.
Okay.
You know, I think many of us for years have gone to those obligatory events where, you know, we passed around business cards. I imagine people here remember business cards. And then you would either come home and forget who the person was, or you would connect with them on LinkedIn and then never engage again. Okay. That is not a meaningful connection. Walking in and talking to 50 people and not remembering who you talked to is not building meaningful connections. That is necessary sometimes, especially if you are in a career that requires sales, business development, partnership creation, fundraising. However, what the relationships that actually stand the test of time, the people that keep showing up, those are meaningful connections. And I go so far as saying, if you want to build meaningful connections, you have to open up yourself to be more vulnerable. And that is sometimes the scariest thing. But one thing I did learn over this last year during this horrific time is we are all much more vulnerable. We are all much more likely to be open to sharing that we're struggling. Okay. 10 years ago, if you were a woman in the corporate world, God help you if you walked into a room and, you know, shed a tear, right?
Correct.
That has changed. And you know what? That is a silver lining.
Mm-hmm. We can be more we are being more vulnerable. All right, so tell us a little bit about, if you will, Susan. I know that you work for PR Newswire, that you've been involved in communications and brands for a long time. Share a little bit about your background and how it informed your path moving forward.
Sure. Well, I should start with the breakfast table in the early 70s in upstate New York, because I think sometimes I have to admit that a lot of this was bred in me. I had parents that both worked in some semblance of public service. My mother did public relations for PBS. My father was a professor who taught at a women's college for 40 years. But every morning at the breakfast table, I would have to vie for real estate to have my bowl of cereal, because there would be the 5 local newspapers and yesterday's New York Times, because it came a day late. And they would be both clipping and cutting for articles that made them think of, a third cousin or a colleague, or in my father's case, a daughter of a student that he had 30 years before. And they would then type on their manual typewriters and pop into envelopes and mail them out. This was an everyday occurrence and something that I thought everybody did. So fast forward early 90s, I had a fax machine, and all of a sudden I could do this, what I did in college and post-college. But when that fax machine was on my desk, it was like I had instant gratification. I could go ahead, clip an article and send it to you, Donna, and say, thought of you, right? And the joy I would get from doing that was enough to make it worth my while, whether Donna responded or figured out how to fax back. And to be honest with you, I still don't remember how I figured out how to use the fax machine. It's probably why they don't exist anymore. But I often say I've had 9 lives. My first kind of real job was working for the late Senator Kennedy. I went to graduate school, studied broadcast journalism. My first communications or journalist job was working for USA Today in the 80s. Yes, back when it was 1986, so it was only 4 years old. And then I was with PR Newswire for 17 years, with a 5-year stint in the middle where I worked for some technology companies. And I was always that person who was, can I say SHIT here? No, I was told yesterday. No,
I don't know. We're gonna have to check with our censors, but I think you just said it, so it's okay.
I was that person that got shit done. So for every 2 years, I would run special projects, creating new products. I helped open our offices in Beijing and Shanghai. Anyhow, blah, 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 blah. The one conduit through all of that, of course, my connecting people was always part of who I was, but I had one foot always in philanthropy, whether it was volunteering, whether it was fundraising for causes I believed in. And eventually, as I had basically, I had reached that level in my career, I was able to serve on nonprofit boards. And so therefore, you had asked Donna how the kind of impact came into being. I was always that go-to person when the company wanted to fund a particular charity or buy a table at a gala. It was like, oh, Susan will know who we should support. So that is where I really, became aligned with impact. And one other quick story, in 2003, I moved to New York City from Seattle, and I knew no one. So I did something that I did all my life, and I recommend in the book, and that is I got involved in nonprofits here in New York City so I could actually meet people. And one of the nonprofits I joined was called Business Council for Peace, B-Peace, which was and still is a network of business professionals who pool their business acumen to train women entrepreneurs in regions of conflict. And in 2005, I went to Afghanistan, and for 2 weeks, I worked with women entrepreneurs who were building small businesses, not microfinance businesses, but small businesses. And honestly, Donna, that was the first time in real glaring vision, I saw business being a force for good. And that is what propelled me on this kind of path to corporate responsibility.
I just want to dig in on that a little bit deeper. You're in Afghanistan. I remember wanting to go when I was at the WNBA. What did you specifically see and feel working with these women that said, oh, this is business for good? What were they doing?
Sure.
What were they accomplishing?
Sure. And it was the lead up to, I mean, I was witnessing, professionals from, say, Marriott or, Deloitte, who were basically transferring their knowledge, whether it was about the hospitality industry or about learning how to market and sell your business, to hiring and translating that to women entrepreneurs. And much of this was done via Skype at the time, because that was the technology available. And then when we physically went, we had already identified 15 women that we called at the time fast runners that had already applied to the program. And then literally over 2 weeks, trained them on QuickBooks, trained them on how to market their business for their audience. Okay. And, you know, I will tell you, being in Afghanistan in 2005, which was fairly, you know, I mean, the country has been through hell and it's still going through hell. But I almost likened it to going, and I don't know how this is going to sound, but do you remember Wizard of Oz when Dorothy went from black and white to
Color?
multicolor?
Sure.
I felt I went from multicolor to black and white because the country in Kabul was so decimated at that point. And this is a city that in the 60s was known as, you know, the Paris of the East. So anyhow, I mean, that was, and because of just the war and destruction, there was no greenery, there were no trees, and
right.
you know, and coming from, you know, granted, I was coming from New York City. It's not like we're this plethora of green space, but there's trees.
Oh, there's trees and there's plants, and yes, absolutely, and that's all decimated in a war zone for sure. Let's talk a little bit, if we can. We're here to talk about your book. Somehow, Susan, the woman who moves from Seattle to New York, uses philanthropy as a way of connection, right? Writes this book in a timely way. I'm gonna try to echo the support of your sister, called The Lost Art of Connection. Tell us a little bit about that. We have gather, ask, and do.
Sure.
Tell us how we can improve our connections.
Well, you know, I will back up just real quickly. The impetus for the book, people for years said, Susan, write a book about how you build connections. And I'm like, who the hell needs to hear yet another voice, right? I mean, there's books everywhere. And then I looked at the last 8 years of my company's growth, McPherson Strategies, and about 98% of our business has been inbound. And it dawned on me, there is a reason for that. It is those connections that I built starting in my 20s, not just taking business cards and forgetting about people, but actually staying in touch, showing up, supporting others, making connections. So that was the tipping point that basically gave me the impetus to write the book. It had, of course, nothing to do with the pandemic. And why I'm excited about the book now is we are on the cusp of being able to reemerge. So when in life do we get a chance to actually do over, right? And actually build connections with intention. So the book is divided into 3 very specific parts, very prescriptive. And as Donna just mentioned, gather, ask, do. And gather, ask, do can be something you can do throughout your life, and especially can be helpful if you are in a transition phase, you're moving to a new city, you're starting a new job, or you want to move to a new city, or you want to start a new job. And the gather phase is actually when you do the necessary self-reflection to, 1, determine what is your secret sauce? What is your chief differentiating factor? And I'm often asked by 20-somethings, I'm too young to have a secret sauce. And my response often is TikTok, or you know, being able to set up lighting for Zoomcasts, right? I digress. But also part of gather is determining what it is you want to accomplish in the next 4 years, 4 months, even 4 weeks. And in that time, what is the community you want to surround yourself with? And almost as importantly is, how are you going to ensure that your community doesn't just look like you, so that you are constantly challenged and informed and your horizons are broadened. The next phase is ask. And ask is probably a little bit different than you might be thinking. It's not about asking for what you want, which is important. Don't get me wrong.
Okay.
But this ask portion of the book is all about learning to ask the deep, meaningful questions that are going to elicit the responses that enable you to be helpful, to make you indispensable, to make you that reliable person who is known as someone who gets shit done.
What does that sound like? What does that sound like? What does one of those asks sound like?
Sure. Well, first of all, the overarching theme is leading with how can I help rather than what can I get?
Love that.
So
I love that. Yep.
So that's the pivot, you know, because we've always walked into these rooms thinking, okay, I need to meet 20 people and I need to get. It's more like I need to talk to 3 people, learn 3 things, and share three things. Okay. And when your question about what does that ask look like, instead of asking somebody what they ate for lunch today, or what they're doing tonight, or what the weather's like in their city, which I can't imagine how many of us, I wish we could see a show of hands, but how many of us are on Zoom calls and guess what? In the first 5 minutes, all we talk about is the weather. I contend that it would be much more meaningful to go around the room and ask people, how are you dealing right now? What could you use help with? When this all ends, what are you most excited about? Those types of questions will elicit a much more meaningful response than what's the weather like in Dubuque?
Okay, so repeat those questions again. I just want people to take those in. No, they're important. They're important. They're important.
How are you doing through this pandemic? What is it that you need that I can be helpful with? Or how can I be helpful to you to help you through this very difficult time?
Okay, I would love to get everybody's reaction. I know that Mary Lee's out there, and Rachel and Leah Jewell joined us out in Facebook land, and Ann Flipsy, hey, Mary Stevens, and Melinda, and Nancy Kaminsky. All these people have joined us, and I'd love everyone to get engaged in this conversation, because I will tell you that those are fantastic questions. But let me just flip it a little bit. As a recipient of those questions, sometimes it's daunting. What can I do to help you? And then you're like, wow, that's really nice. I like you. I don't really know how to answer that. I don't know if I want to answer that, right? So how do we not only be a good outward connector, but how do we receive connection in a way that's authentic and feels good?
Sure. Great questions. And that may need to be my next book.
Okay.
But I'll say, I want to caveat all of this. This is not instantaneous. Okay. This is not a perfect response. If you don't feel comfortable answering, and that's fine too, is, can I come back to you? Can I think about that? Okay. This is, again, because the goal is these are not immediate. Okay. Rome wasn't built, what is the statement? In a week, in a night, in a day.
Right.
These are, and I know there's people in your audience that I adore and love, and those relationships were built over time.
Uh-huh.
It was that once, how you doing? Slam, bam, thank you, ma'am, right? It was over time.
Right. So here's a question from Char. I do want to say that Melinda, who is on this call, is always saying, what can I do for you? And every reaction is, I am filled with love and gratitude. But I also don't want to step over the line and say, well, you know what, how about this? Not that that's the right answer. I'm not saying that. Shar wrote in and said, hey, I'm a recent retiree and I'm having a hard time, meeting people. How would you, what kind of recommendations would you have?
Well, first of all, Shar, good for you to even share that, because that is scary as hell, right?
Well, she says connecting. She didn't say meeting people. She says connecting.
Okay. Well, they're both the same. And I think baby steps, okay? I think set reasonable goals. And I think actually start with your own existing community and ask for introductions. People who love you will happily introduce you to other people, but give them a reason to do so. Give them something that you're particularly proud of yourself, and share that and say, here's something that I feel really good about that I've done, and I want to get that word out. Would you be so kind to introduce me to 3 people over the next month? And, oh, by the way, how can I be helpful to you?
Right. Now, we also talked about this, and it's coming up. I love the chat. And Melinda offered, oh, Lisa, I used to use these words and found that I was overwhelmed around December. I could not take on any more problems, which mostly came from entrepreneurs. I found I needed to get better at referrals, being a super connector.
Well, I will say to that, Lisa, I have found, because I have grown my connections over the years, I've actually become more efficient, because inevitably I will know the go-to person to get that help for that person. So in some ways, it's relieving the pressure for you to have to be all things to all people.
Right.
Okay? It's like additional brain cells in your head. And,
right.
And please don't try to always commit these things to memory. A notebook is the most powerful gift you can have in your back pocket.
Oh, we talked about this, right? I take notes all the time. all the time. And the problem is there are notes everywhere. I have to come up with a system. Maybe that's also another book for you. Now, Melinda, we talked about this a little bit, right? She says that people are often hesitant to connect because they feel like they have to offer something to make the connection valued, and they don't feel like they really have something to offer. What advice would you give them?
Well, that is the whole part of the gather phase. And that is where you actually do some deep connecting, because I will go so far as say everyone has something. Everyone. Okay. And it may seem at the moment you don't, because you maybe we're living in a global pandemic. You might be kind of depressed, and that's normal too. But I think, look back at your career, look back at the volunteer service you've done, look at the children you might have raised. Okay. Everybody has something. Look at what you cooked last night for dinner. Okay. I mean, I'm being silly, but everyone has something to offer. And please, I am more than happy to take this offline and talk to you and find out what you have to offer.
She's got a lot to offer, but we're sensitive. So in Generation W, we bring together thousands of women. And what I find is so powerful, Susan, is the way everyone shows up to connect, yeah. Right? There's so many environments that do have an impact on how open we feel, how vulnerable we feel, how accepting and loving we will feel. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Right? And so the question also comes up with, again, related. Beth Cravey says, what advice do you have for shy people who tend to hang back, that need to make connections?
Yeah. There's a chapter in my book where I interview an actually nationally known shy person, Amora Aarons Melee. She wrote the book Hiding in the Bathroom. And even me, okay, and I know I seem like the extrovert of the world, I can't tell you how many times I wanted to hide in the bathroom. Seriously. I mean, I'm tiny, and when I walk in a room, oftentimes no one sees me. So there's that intimidation I often feel. But back to your question, this is not about networking. This is about talking to 2 or 3 people in the chat, not trying to talk to everyone. So I think, and maybe you can help me understand, because I am not a shy person, that is a more kind of something you can actually deal with, rather than trying to talk to 25 people. And I said earlier, baby steps. And literally, when you walk into any gathering, just have a number in your mind that you can live with. And I think 3, sometimes maybe just 2. Meet 2 people, learn 2 new things, and share 2 things. Right. For someone who's shy, I would think that would be palatable and acceptable.
Let me just say hello to everybody. We are at today's refresh with the amazing super connector, super smart, Susan McPherson. And I want to go here. Well, Beth, I'm going to come back to your question about Generation W and organizations as a place for connections for women. What I would like to go to, Sherry, is let's go to our graphic. There we go. This idea about intentional connection. I thought these were powerful thoughts that you have, which kind of opens up how we think about ourselves and connection in a larger sense. Can you see it, Susan?
Yes, every connection is a door opener. Every person has something to offer, and connection is valuable to our humanity. And also, an interesting factoid, connection is actually valuable to our health. And studies have shown that if you are a deeply connected individual, not only will you live a longer life, but you will be far more productive professionally.
Really? Tell us more about that.
It shows, because you are able to traverse different networks, which you then can bring to your professional livelihood. It goes back to what I was saying in terms of having that kind of CRM at your disposal of experts to be able to reach out to. You might have heard of the organization Gerson Lehrman. I mean, they are built on being able to find experts. But if you have a database, let's say, in your mind, or at least in your notebook, of people you can go to, then you are that much more valuable to your company.
Right. What's interesting about this question, Shar just emphasized it, is how are you, and is there anything I can do to help you?
Yeah.
I find that when hey, of being of service makes me feel better. So maybe that's also tied to this whole health thing.
Oh, completely, completely. I mean, and this is why people volunteer. I mean, you know, the dopamine you get from doing good. But I have found over the years, leading with how can I help will enable you to have a more meaningful conversation so that you can get to the do phase. Okay.
Right.
And
Right.
for professionals, you want to be a doer. No matter what you do, you want to be a doer. Okay.
Yes, yes. I think it's also part of women. We just want to do, even though we're like, right, we're stacked up here, but like, what
Well,
else can I,
I
what else
think
can I do?
better doers than men. I think men like to do. I just don't think they are. They're not as successful at multitasking. I think that might be.
Well, I think that has to do some brain chemistry. There is some research on that. And Flipsy wants to know what do you do when there's a toxic person in the mix?
Ah, you mean those girls we went to high school with that we thought we were going to be done with when we graduated, and they still seem to rear their heads?
Yes, they
There's
come back.
always, there is always, and I, you know, believe me, I still run into them where, you know, you might be able to say, how can I help? And they, first of all, think you're being manipulative and that you actually only are thinking of yourself. And the only thing I can do, and maybe it took me to be 56 to have the gumption to be able to say, you know what, I'm not going to engage. So I don't think toxicity is harmful to us all.
Oh, without a doubt. So you just refuse to engage.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're offering your help, if you're offering your support, and somebody is being rude to you, I can't help you there, right? I mean, I think you have to decide. I realize if this is something in the workplace, that is a whole nother issue, and you know, obviously, you have to deal with and go to whatever means of reporting that you have.
Right. So Jakimba, welcome on Facebook, and Carla, glad that they're loving that. I just want to let you know they're loving the advice. I'm sure you'll have some questions. Please do pass them along. Now, at the ripe old age of 48, you said you started a company.
I did. I started my company.
So tell us about that, because all of us, listen, that's a broad generalization. So many of us question every day where we are. And Leah Jewell talks about the future of work. She's also on, and she'll be doing that at Gen W, by the way, on Thursday evening. Where are we? Are we doing what we really want to do? Should I start a company? Is this my passion? And somehow, and am I too old?
Wow. Yeah, that's always, all great questions and concerns. And I will say,
how did you answer them?
Well, first of all, if I had started my company at 35, I don't think it would have been successful because I wouldn't have had this lifetime of experience, but also lifetime of connections that have shown up. So I do think that starting a business later in life is actually an advantage in your corner. Okay. I joke because total truth, my company was just a stopping point. It was figuring out what the next step was. And then the business kept growing. And I never, first of all, I never would have named it McPherson Strategies if I thought it was going to turn into something bigger than a few months. And that's because it's my ex-husband's name, and we divorced in 2003. Mind you, he is a great guy. So there's nothing, no shame in that. But I just would never have named it that.
Right. Okay.
But it was literally, I was working for a different consulting firm that was at the time going through a large exodus of talent. And for anyone in the room who has worked in the consulting world, when talent leaves, the writing's on the wall. So 2 organizations, Girl Rising and Global Citizen Year, both said, Susan, if you leave, we will offer you, 3 or 4 months of consulting. And I hadn't gone without a paycheck since I was 15. And I'm sure many of you can relate. I had bag lady syndrome. I was terrified of not having an income. So I left the firm that I was at on a Friday, and I started on a Monday because I was terrified that they both would change their mind. So the reason I tell that story is I get scared too. I get terrified. The same, I hide in the bathroom, you name it. But I will say that looking back over these last 8 years, I am so grateful that I actually took this scary step. And I'm thrilled that I stayed with it. I now have a team of the 12 most incredible women, of course, they're women, um, um,
Right.
who are doing such important work around social impact communications.
Now, give us, tell us about one of your social impact projects. I think that would be interesting to learn more about that.
Oh my goodness. Well, so many. One really interesting one that it's very unique. It's called Reimagine Gender.
Mhm.
And it's a nonprofit that helps businesses understand this new world of non-binary gender. And the entire notion is it's not about the bathrooms and it's not about the pronouns, but it's about how do we actually celebrate gender, whatever that gender may be, and think of the potential business opportunities around that going forward. So we are helping Reimagine Gender with messaging, with introductions to companies. Um, Another is Heifer International, which,
I've heard of them.
yes,
Yes.
have often been known as the goat charity, but actually they are literally helping farmers all over the world create regenerative farming rather than what is contributing to global greenhouse gases. Zoetis, the company that is keeping our puppies and kittens, and if we have farms, our livestock safe, we are helping them with how they are communicating their philanthropy, which they are getting, or they have just launched. Anyhow, I don't want to bore your listeners, but
No, first of all, I think it's really it's interesting to know what's going on. Like, how would we know about any of these companies or any of these initiatives?
right.
Everybody's
One thing we just launched 2 weeks ago, the first credit card that pays women back when you shop women owned, or pays anyone back. It's called the Card by Seneca.
Oh yes, of course. I just saw that. I saw that Milan
Milan Verveer.
And Kim just launched that.
We did the launch from the communications, and anytime you shop women owned, you will get 3% back.
Yes, I saw that. I had no idea that you even did that. I will tell you, just as a consumer, I thought the materials were fantastic.
Yay!
I really did. I noticed them. I went back to them. I shared them with somebody. I thought they were great. Well done.
Everyone here, you should go to the Seneca website and not only sign up for the card, but also recommend a woman-owned business so that they can be part of the network. It's a massive card, but yeah. Shame on
our team. We should get on that. We have a store and we have our big event. Yeah. We should be there. Hey, Joy Kurtz, in reaction to your working with the one of the organizations with the horrible new legislation on transgender issues being introduced in so many states, how does that affect your work?
Well, I mean, we are not working directly with any transgender organizations. Reimagine Gender obviously helps companies understand how to be traversing that and understanding and how to respond. But I can't, we directly are not working on that particular issue, at least at this point in time. NARAL has been a client. We launched a few years ago a campaign called Don't Ban Equality, where we were able to get 360 CEOs to step up and state that the abortion bans were actually bad for business. Because we all know abortion for years has been almost framed as a more, social, moral issue, right? And we know it needed to be talked about. Women's reproductive health needed to be talked about in the boardroom the same way people were talking about climate, LGBTQ, gun issues, because these issues affect business.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay, so your everyday is not boring at all. at all. You did talk about, though, you had a fear of missing out. Sherry, let's put up that graphic.
Oh, yeah.
Share that with us. I think we all have a sense. I mean, listen, you share your business, what you're working on, makes us feel included, a little bit more knowledgeable. But you did talk about fear of missing out.
Well, this addresses the introverts in the room because part of the gather phase is learning how to be able to convene. Okay, hence gather, right? You want to be gathering your community. And one of the most effective ways to do that is be the convener. And honestly, that grew out of my years, probably back in high school when I would find out about birthday parties I didn't get invited to, the early stages of FOMO. Fast forward to Instagram when you actually see in real time all the parties you don't get invited to. And I decided, you know what? I want to convene. And instead of being the joy of missing out, why don't we think about it as the joy of meeting others? And, for the introverts, think of it this way. All you have to do is invite 2 or 3 people and ask them each to bring one person. And voila, you have a gathering.
Okay. And then, well, did you see the graphic though? How did you move FOMO to JOMO?
Well, I basically, for me, it's like that's how I solve it. If I'm not going to be invited, I'm going to be the invitor.
Right.
And as you do that, there is joy in meeting others. Everyone you meet is an introduction, a conduit, an opportunity to learn something about them, but also learn something about yourself. So to me, there's joy in doing so.
Okay, so so share with us, what are the most important things you've learned about yourself in this process, Susan?
Well, I've gained a lot of confidence.
Were you not a confident person before?
Absolutely not. No, I'm not even 5 foot tall. And I think I mentioned earlier, when I would walk in a room, nobody would see me. In my 20s, people thought I was 15, so they didn't take me seriously.
But you're happy about that now.
Not really. I mean, I'm just a short old lady. That's all.
You're okay. You might be short. I cannot tell how short you are, but you're huge in stature and you're beautiful.
I remember meeting you when I've met, I've actually gotten to be good friends with people that I've met on various social platforms, Twitter being one. And when I've met people after in real life, they'd be like, you seem so much larger online. And it's like, really? Like, what did you think? Like I was 9 feet tall?
Yeah, actually, Zoom is a great equalizer in that way, right? We all kind of fit in this little box. We don't really know.
Sure. Through writing this book, I'm so grateful for the people who contributed, ranging from Whitney Johnson to Adam Grant, Baratunde Thurston, Gina Bianchini, who founded Mighty Networks. There are so many people. Kate Luzio, who founded Luminary. We mentioned Anne Choquette earlier, who
yes,
is president of The List. Amy Nelson, who founded The Riveter. I mean, people who have made building connections such a core part of their being. So, I learned a lot from them. I think overall, I learned that even through this horrific pandemic, as suffering as it may be, one silver lining is we will never take for granted our relationships with others. And we have this opportunity to do over now and to actually not only connect, but reconnect in a deeper, more meaningful way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think the spotlight that this period of time has shown on so many different areas where we can do better is inspiring, right? It's been painful. Yeah. But I have to say, after reading Glennon's book Untamed, she talks about how pain is such a fuel for moving forward more positively. And I think that she's right about that. Yeah. You just listed a whole bunch of women who have organizations that actually value women in connection. And Beth Cravey, who is a reporter for the Florida Times Union, that says, how can women, anyone, essentially, use organizations like Generation W as a place for connections?
What you're doing right now, but I would take it to the next level and actually reach out to people in the community, which with whatever means you're most comfortable, and say, hi, Jill, I'm Susan. I would love to maybe take 5 minutes of your time to learn more about you and see how I can be helpful to you. Simple as that. And I would try to do that, maybe 3 times a week. Okay. And be very intentional about it. And, obviously some weeks you can't do it because you have a zillion other things going on, and that's okay too. But, these gatherings and these communities are gifts, but they're only gifts if we actually take the next step, and that people just aren't names on the screen.
Right. So so that people reach out to each other. But I also think that there is a comfortability in being connected in a space. You might, like, we're still in our own space, but our own space is still connecting with other people's spaces. Even if we choose not to say anything, there is, I don't know how to even explain it, but there is this energy and power that comes from being in a space together maybe it's aligned thinking or ideas, or again, this feeling of acceptance and love that comes with feeling safe.
And
belonging, great word.
Right. I mean, that goes back to being, when we were children, we want to feel like we belong. And I will go one step further. We want to be seen and heard. And watching you, Donna, gracefully manage this, the way you call out people, the way you show them that they are being seen is such a gift, and it's a gift to your community. And I am so excited to actually be here and actually getting to witness you should have been in the book, so shame on me. And
no, I'm going to be able to read and share. I'm going to be able to read and share your book, which will be great, because now listen to Kyle Green's on here, and Kyle's got daughters, and that's what actually brought him to Gen W in the beginning. He goes, I love what you're doing, and I want my daughters to experience it, and yet he shows up, which is really so nice. I do think it's really, I love this community. That there's no doubt about it. And I feel like the community doesn't even know all each other, but they know that they're in a community that has love and connection, and that's powerful. And it has kept us, somewhat sane through these challenges. Because even as we dipped, then we dipped together. As we came up together, right? And we don't, you talked about the epidemic of loneliness in America.
And you know what? When the pandemic ends, that's not going away, because it existed long before. But two things, when you are lonely, it may be very, very hard to do this, but as best as you can, muster up that SOS and reach out to people in just a little, whatever way you can. I mean, I think I mentioned early on, this has been really hard for me in this past year. I've been single for the last 6 years, and I used to fill my loneliness with constant travel, constant hosting of events, so that I didn't have to be alone. Because quite frankly, I was terrified of being alone. My mother was killed in a horrible tragedy when I was 22. And since that day, I was terrified of being alone. So this past year has been living my actual terror. And I knew if I didn't reach out to people on a regular basis, people might have forgotten about me. I mean, I know I have people who love me and care about me. So I certainly don't want to be like, oh, woe is me. But I actually, on any given day, would text 3 people and just say, thinking of you, miss you, how are you? And not with the intent of a response necessarily, but just that act of doing that gave me some dopamine, gave me a sense of belonging. So, I mean, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a sociologist. I'm just offering personal human experience that has helped me this past year. And you can bet your bottom, whatever you call it, that I'm not stopping once we're back in the real world.
Oh, well, that was one of the questions that came up really for you, which is, what are you going to hold on to from this past year in our new normal or our better normal, or whatever we're going to call it? What are you going to hold on to?
Well,
I think that's to hold on to.
Sure. I think I'm going to hold on to what I hope a lot of us are going to hold on to, and that notion that nothing matters more than these human connections. Okay. I mean, yes, our livelihoods, our health, all of that, but to not have loved ones in our lives. And I go so far as loved ones with my colleagues, the people that certainly the people I work with and the people I've worked with over the years, they almost become family in some ways.
Yes.
I also, this year business has become much more compassionate and empathetic. And I think, the C-suite hopefully will continue to encourage that. That only good will come if business is more empathetic, compassionate, and at least I say vulnerable.
Yes, I agree with you. So let me just say this. Usually at the end here, when I take notes, I don't know if you noticed, Susan, I do.
I'm terrified.
Why are you terrified? First of all, no, these are like, I actually think at the end, I mean, right now we've done, just so everybody, I think we've done 45 shows. Wow. As we came out of the new year, we cut back to 2 because we're preparing for our big annual event. And we have super doers here, but we do have our limits in terms of capacity.
Of course.
So from Susan McPherson, what does she want to remind us in the Gather, Ask, Do? She wants to remind us, and I love this, that nothing matters more than our human connections. Nothing matters more. And when we think about that in terms of how we prioritize our lives, right? We're going to take the time to do some of the things that you suggested and feel good about them, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? And that connection is valuable to your health.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And the studies show that.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And they do that now. And there's never been more important time for connection. So I think that the idea of gathering, the question is how we're going to do that moving forward. Are people going to come out of their houses? What is the new workplace going to look like in terms of gathering? All of that stuff is actively being debated now.
Of course. And it's much of it will be very personal. Obviously, it will depend geographically what the state, what the laws are in your particular state,
right.
What you're comfortable with. I mean, safety is most important. Okay. Right. And nobody should be, jumping to get together. I also think it's going to be gradual. Like it's not going to all of a sudden be Times Square post World War II. And, we're going to have millions of people. Donna, I want to address a question that came through when Mary Stevens said, when I hear how can I be helpful feels like a superior attitude, an assumption that I need help. I want to address that because it certainly isn't coming from that. And I'm sorry if you're feeling that way, because I believe, and I could be way wrong, and everyone can use a little bit of help in life. And it isn't because I'm the great helper. It's just that I also know everyone has something to offer up to help. So it is not from any kind of superior or thinking that I'm all well and good and can solve everyone's problems.
Well, yeah, and I hope that's helpful, Mary. Thanks for answering that question. Closing question for you, although we're not leaving just yet. Piece of advice for your younger self. Now, I mean, you've talked a lot about how you've learned so much. As you look back, what would you like to leave little Susan with based on what you've learned today?
You've got this. That's it. Don't be so afraid of everything. Because I was. And I wasted a lot of time being fearful.
Right. But maybe it also helped you build your courage, right?
Yeah.
It could be that too, right? Yes. So everybody, we're here. It's a 10th anniversary celebration year. We wanted to give you these, I don't know if it's a minute 22 of Generation W celebration as we are preparing for April 16th. It is the power of connection. So Susan's now one of our new, actually tribal leaders on connection. She doesn't know it, but we just named her that. So Sherry, take it away. Hope you'll all join us. Please do register. It just fills my heart. So many images, so many people. And I don't know if you saw Marian Benacara, but she was our connector and she was there on the stage. So there you go. Also, I want to let everyone know if there is a teen girl in your life, please be her mentor, be her shiro. On Thursday evening at 5 o'clock, We are launching Wowsdom Live, which is supported by Bank of America. Our special guest is Dr. Maya Warren. She is an ice cream scientist. She is extraordinary. And this is a really safe, wonderful, energizing, connecting space for girls at a time when they really don't have those spaces. And they're going to make ice cream. They're going to make ice cream and learn about themselves and hopefully begin to make the connections that will last over 10 months, which is when we'll be doing these shows. If you do know a girl, please, again, recommend her to us and we'll get her signed up. It's a really wonderful, wonderful hour. I always love it when they let me kind of peek in. And last but not least, we'll be back on March 31st with some fantastic guests to be celebrating again our 10th anniversary. So we look forward to seeing you then. Thank you. Thank you so much, Susan. I am so glad now I can tell all the women who I mentioned you were going to be on that you are my friend, our friend too. So welcome to Generation W. Thank you. We are here to support you. So we will figure out how to do that as much as we can. Okay. Thanks everybody who joined us today. We hope this was what it was meant to be, a refresh. See you on the 31st.